They laughed when I said I was chasing a dream at 62. That night, under the glittering lights of my daughter's wedding, they finally stopped laughing. The music was soft, romantic, the kind that makes people sway and smile. The chandeliers above the ballroom shimmered like frozen fireworks, and every table was covered in roses, champagne flutes, and polite laughter. I sat quietly at the corner table, a proud mother of the bride. Invisible, as usual. It was supposed to be the happiest night of Rachel's life, and for a while it was, until the microphone found its way to her maid of honor. A woman named Melissa, a little too tipsy, a little too talkative. She started with the usual jokes about Rachel and Jake's love story, the college years, the proposal, the tears. Everyone laughed. Then she turned her smiling eyes toward me. "And let's give a special round of applause," she said, "to the bride's mother, Eleanor, who's been, how should I say it, reinventing herself lately." The crowd chuckled. My stomach tightened. Melissa giggled. You know, when most women hit 60, they take up knitting or gardening. But not Eleanor. She decided she was going to be the next business tycoon. Isn't that adorable? The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, just careless. The kind that cuts deeper, because people don't realize how sharp it is. My daughter Rachel laughed too, but nervously, glancing at her guests, then back at me. Jake, her new husband, leaned in and whispered something in her ear that made her blush and look away. I smiled. Of course I smiled, because that's what women my age do when we're being patronized. We smile to make everyone comfortable. When Melissa handed the microphone back, the room buzzed with whispers. I could feel their eyes on me. Amused, pitying, certain. The old woman with her little business idea. The mother going through her late life crisis. What none of them knew was that I had been working quietly for 6 years on something far bigger than their imagination could stretch. I had built 6 companies under one umbrella, all functioning, all profitable, employing over 400 people. But I'd kept it quiet. I didn't want Rachel's wedding to turn into my stage. At least, that had been the plan. Then came Jake. "Mrs. Hayes," he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "I hope your hobby is going well. You've been keeping yourself busy, huh?" The room chuckled again. Even Rachel winced. Something in me shifted. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. A calm, clean understanding that some lessons only silence can't teach. I stood up. The laughter faded. Maybe it was the suddenness of my movement. Or maybe it was the way I picked up the microphone with steady hands. Either way, every head turned toward me. "Thank you, Melissa," I began softly. My voice was warm but steady. "And thank you, Jake, for your kind words." A few people laughed nervously. Rachel looked alarmed. "Mom," she whispered, but I raised a hand gently to quiet her. "You know," I continued, "it's funny how people see what they want to see. You assumed my business was small because I didn't talk much about it. You thought I was just an old woman with too much free time. Maybe you thought I was too old to accomplish anything significant." The room went still. So quiet you could hear the soft hum of the chandelier lights. "The truth," I said, "is that while you were all joking about my little late life adventure, I was building something real. The company you called a hobby now employs over 400 people across 6 branches. The midlife crisis you laughed about, that's 6 years of work that's already paying for 3 weddings just like this one." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Melissa froze. Jake's mouth fell open. And Rachel, my beautiful, intelligent daughter, looked like her world had just flipped upside down. "Mom," she whispered. I had no idea." "I know, sweetheart," I said gently. "Every time I tried to tell you, you rolled your eyes and changed the subject. You told me not to embarrass you in front of your fiancé's colleagues. So I didn't. But it seems fate had other plans." A man from across the room, Anderson, the wedding planner, cleared his throat. "If I may," he said, stepping closer. "I've worked with Ms. Hayes professionally. Everything she's said is true. Her companies have one of the best reputations in the industry." The silence that followed was heavy and electric, like the moment before a storm breaks. I smiled again, but this time it wasn't forced. "This wasn't how I wanted the night to go," I said softly, turning to Rachel. "I didn't plan to talk about my work. I just wanted to celebrate you. But sometimes, the truth finds its way out, whether we're ready or not." I handed the microphone back to Anderson. "Now," I said, "let's get back to celebrating the couple." Polite applause broke out, then genuine applause. But behind the clapping hands, the eyes that met mine were different now. No longer dismissive, no longer patronizing. There was awe there, and maybe a little fear. I sat back down, feeling the strangest combination of peace and exhaustion. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't shamed anyone. I had simply told the truth, and that had been enough to change everything. That night, as the guests danced and the champagne flowed, I watched my daughter's laughter falter every time she glanced my way. She wasn't embarrassed anymore. Not in the same way. She was realizing who I really was. And that realization, I knew, would stay with her long after the music stopped. Because sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't anger. It's success spoken softly in a room that once doubted you. The next morning, the sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Rachel and Jake's penthouse suite. The soft golden glow should have felt warm and comforting. Instead, it felt heavy, almost accusing. I sat at the small kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee, and tried to make sense of the whirlwind of the previous night. The champagne, the laughter, the sudden silence, the stunned faces. It all replayed in my mind like a slow-motion film. My daughter Rachel had been mortified. Not for herself, not because she'd spilled a little social embarrassment on her own mother, but because the truth about my life had been revealed. And she had been so wrong about me. I could hear the faint sounds of movement from the bedroom. Jake, ever the morning person, was probably raiding the minibar. And then Rachel appeared, still in her silk robe, hair slightly tousled from the night's festivities. Her eyes were red, a subtle halo of guilt and confusion circling them. "Mom," she said quietly, almost a whisper. I don't know how to start." I gestured for her to sit. She perched on the edge of the counter, avoiding my gaze, twisting the napkin in her hands, like she was trying to ground herself. "Rachel," I said gently, "don't make this about apologies. We need to talk, yes. But I want you to understand something first." Her breath hitched slightly. I just feel awful. Last night, I made a fool of you. I treated your accomplishments like they were imaginary, like some silly hobby you were playing at. I really didn't think you were capable of all that." I smiled softly, taking a sip of coffee. "That's the thing, sweetheart. I was capable, and I am. The truth has always been there. You just didn't see it, because you assumed you knew what was possible for someone my age." Rachel swallowed hard. "Mom, 6 companies, a portfolio worth, I don't even know how much." Her voice trailed off. "Enough," I said calmly, "to be taken seriously in any boardroom. Enough to employ over 400 people. Enough to invest in companies that are now household names in the tech sector. And yes, that includes the very firm your husband works for." Her eyes widened further, pupils dilating in shock. I can't believe," I thought. "It's all right," I said. "I know you didn't mean to be cruel, but you need to understand why it hurts so much. Not because you laughed at me, but because you didn't believe I was capable of more than what you imagined. That disbelief, that lack of respect, it stings deeper than any mistake or misstep I could ever make." She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I've been so blind. And Jake, he didn't help. He treated your work like some cute little hobby. He didn't realize." "No," I interrupted softly. He didn't. Not because he's a bad person. He just didn't know. And frankly, that's part of the lesson here. People see only what they want to see. That's why it's important to live your truth, quietly or loudly, until they can't ignore it anymore. Rachel exhaled slowly, her hands trembling. Mom, I feel like I owe you everything I didn't say last night. I humiliated you in front of people who, I now realize, could have been important connections for your business. I can't believe I underestimated you so badly. You didn't just underestimate me, Rachel, I said softly, placing my hand over hers. You underestimated the truth of what someone can accomplish when they refuse to give in to age, expectations, or societal limits, and that's a lesson I hope you'll carry with you. Not just about me, but about everyone you meet in life. Never assume you know someone's limits. Her lower lip trembled. I feel terrible. And Jake, he's going to have to process this too. I nodded. He will. But that's on him. My job is to be clear, consistent, and unapologetic about who I am. That's the only way people learn. And for the record, your father's second wife. She'll never be this type of threat, Rachel. This is our strength. Our family legacy isn't just wealth. It's resilience and vision. Rachel's tears now flowed freely. I don't even know how to make it right. I smiled. Start by respecting me. Start by believing in me. That's already a huge step. The rest. The public embarrassment, the whispered apologies, the awkward glances. That's just life catching up with people. And sometimes life is slow, so you have to be patient. She wiped her eyes, nodding slowly. I think I finally understand, Mom. I didn't just laugh at your business. I laughed at your courage, at your ability to do what I thought was impossible. Yes, I said. And courage isn't about doing what people expect. It's about doing what you know is right, even when everyone else thinks you're crazy. Rachel laughed quietly through her tears, a little bitter, a little amazed. Crazy, maybe, but effective, I chuckled. Exactly, and that's why we keep moving forward. Every decision, every late-night strategy session, every risk I took. It wasn't for approval. It was for results. And sometimes, those results arrive in the most unexpected ways. She finally met my eyes fully, her voice trembling but sincere. Mom, I'm sorry, truly. And I want to do better. Not just as your daughter, but as someone who understands the scale of what you've built. I want to respect that. Always. That's all I ask, I said, squeezing her hand. Respect. Recognition will follow naturally. We sat there for a while, in the soft morning light, letting the previous night's chaos settle into clarity. No grand gestures, no dramatics, just understanding finally. Eventually Rachel's phone buzzed, pulling her back into the whirlwind of post-wedding plans. She stood, still shaken, but steadier than when she'd first appeared. Mom, she said softly, thank you for not yelling, for not lashing out, for being you. I nodded. And thank you for finally seeing me. That's the start of repairing what's been strained between us. As she walked away, I sipped my coffee and let the warmth of the sun sink in. For the first time in years, I felt untouchable. Not because of money or business, but because I had lived my truth. And for anyone trying to define me by their narrow expectations, well, they had seen firsthand how wrong assumptions can be. Little did I know, that morning would only be the beginning. Because what Rachel didn't realize, what no one at the wedding fully realized, was that my work and influence were about to intersect with their lives in ways that would make last night's revelations look like child's play. The days after Rachel's wedding were surreal. On the surface, life seemed normal. Conversations flowed. People smiled. But underneath, something had shifted. Subtly, yet unmistakably. I could feel it in the way Jake avoided certain topics at family dinners. I could sense it in the polite hesitation in Rachel's voice. And most importantly, I could feel it in the air when business calls came in, reminding me that my world was as real and powerful as I had ever known it to be. It started with the first family dinner after the wedding. My sister, Claire, tried her usual lecture on age-appropriate ambitions, sitting across from me at the table with her perfect salad and disapproving expression. "So, Eleanor," she began, casually sipping her wine, "are you still consulting, or is this empire of yours just a phase?" I smiled, keeping my tone calm. "Consulting, yes. Empire, absolutely, and it's growing faster than expected." Her eyes flickered, a micro-expression that gave away the sudden panic I had been waiting for. Claire had always assumed she knew the scope of my business. Small contracts, tiny local shops, cute side projects. The truth? She had no idea. Rachel, sitting beside Jake, glanced at me nervously. "Mom, maybe let's not..." I held up a finger. "Rachel, now's exactly the time. Because the truth has a funny way of teaching lessons, quietly but decisively. You know, last night at the wedding," I said, leaning back slightly. "There were several people who assumed my business was a hobby. People I pay, people who work for me, people whose careers are now tied to the companies I've acquired over the past 18 months. Funny, isn't it?" Jake's face turned pale. He opened his mouth to interrupt, but I didn't let him. I could feel the tension, the silent acknowledgement that something fundamental had changed. "Rachel, your husband works for Sterling Technologies." I continued, deliberately calm. "One of the companies I acquired 3 months ago, the Hendersons. They're all in my portfolio. Patel Data Flow Systems, also mine. And yes, the lady who compared me to her crafting aunt, she works for one of my companies." Funny how assumptions crumble when you realize the truth. The room went quiet. Claire's fork hovered in midair. Rachel's eyes were wide, trembling between awe and embarrassment. And Jake? Well, Jake had turned into something between stunned and terrified. I sipped my wine slowly, enjoying the quiet ripple of realization. Not vindictive, not arrogant, just undeniable. The next few weeks were even more fascinating. Jake, realizing his misjudgment, started reaching out for advice, professionally and personally. "Mom," he said one evening, nervously adjusting his tie over Zoom, I think I need some guidance on the Miller acquisition. I didn't realize your companies were involved." I looked at him through the camera, eyebrow raised. "Oh, you mean the same acquisition you dismissed as small business stuff at the wedding?" His face flushed red. "Yes, I was wrong. I didn't realize." "Good," I said. "Then maybe now you'll listen. Because in business, assumptions can cost people a lot more than embarrassment." He nodded silently. I didn't need to say more. Actions spoke louder than words, and now the lessons were unavoidable. Meanwhile, Rachel struggled in her own way. The guilt weighed on her, not just as my daughter, but as a woman seeing the strength and independence she had underestimated. At first she avoided me, fearful of saying the wrong thing. But after a week, she approached me in the kitchen one morning, holding a half-empty cup of coffee, like a shield. "Mom," she said, quietly, I keep replaying last night. The speech, the guests, the way people reacted. I feel like I failed you." "You didn't fail me, Rachel," I said gently. "You simply learned the truth the hard way. That's what makes this lesson memorable. And I promise you it will shape how you see the world and the people in it forever." Her voice trembled. I was so focused on being embarrassed by you. I never stopped to think that maybe you were capable of things I couldn't even imagine." I reached out and placed my hand on hers. "It's okay. Most people never realize their own misconceptions until they collide with reality. You're lucky you had a front row seat. At work, the power shift became tangible. Executives who had attended the wedding suddenly approached with new respect. Emails that once had a casual, almost dismissive tone now carried deference. Invitations that would have been politely ignored were now urgent. My calendar filled with requests, meetings, and strategic discussions. All because my identity had been revealed publicly. Even Mr. Anderson, Jake's boss, became a key ally. Over dinner one night, he leaned forward and said, "Eleanor, I have to admit, seeing that in person, watching the shift in respect, it's extraordinary. People respond to authority differently when they realize it's legitimate. You've built something incredible," I nodded. "It's not just about the work, Robert. It's about living consistently with your truth. People notice eventually, some quicker than others," he smiled. "You're making quite the impression on your daughter too." I chuckled softly. That's the hardest part, teaching your child about respect and recognition, especially when they thought they already knew you. That's a lifelong lesson. Rachel slowly began to adjust. Conversations became more honest. She asked questions about my companies, sought advice about career moves for her friends, and began to understand the scope of what I had built. At family gatherings, she would occasionally glance at me, eyes wide with awe and a hint of lingering embarrassment. "Mom," she whispered one evening as we watched the sunset from my apartment balcony, "I never realized everything you've done, and last night everyone else saw it too. I feel overwhelmed." I smiled. "Good. Feeling overwhelmed is a sign that you're growing. Now, let's make sure that respect isn't fleeting." By the end of the month, the family dynamics had shifted noticeably. Claire approached me cautiously during a Sunday brunch. "Eleanor, I think I might have been wrong about a few things," she said carefully. I raised an eyebrow. "Such as, well, your business, your abilities, your determination. I mean, people can't argue with results, right?" "Exactly," I said, smiling. "Results speak louder than assumptions, and sometimes those assumptions come from people closest to you, the ones who should know better." Claire nodded slowly, silent for a long moment. Then she smiled, a little sheepishly. "I will do better." By now it was clear. The wedding incident was no longer just a memory. It had become a catalyst, reshaping perceptions, adjusting power balances, and forcing everyone, especially Rachel and Jake, to confront their underestimations. For me, Eleanor Hayes, this was more than vindication. It was a confirmation that life after 62 could be bold, ambitious, and unapologetic. And for Rachel, it was a lesson she would carry forward. A constant reminder that sometimes the people you think you know best are capable of far more than you imagined. Weeks passed, and life had begun to settle into a new rhythm. But it was anything but normal. The wedding revelation had shifted more than just family dynamics. It had sent ripples across my professional and personal life. Every conversation, every dinner, every meeting carried an unspoken tension. The world now knew the truth about Eleanor Hayes, the woman who refused to be underestimated at 62. I spent most mornings in my office, the space I had carefully curated to balance elegance and efficiency. Large windows overlooked the city skyline, sunlight bouncing off the sleek, modern furniture. On my desk lay contracts, proposals, and reports. The lifeblood of a portfolio that had expanded far beyond the modest consulting business everyone had once assumed I ran. I had 6 companies under my wing now, each strategically chosen to build influence, revenue, and long-term growth. Even so, managing these companies wasn't just about money or power. It was about control, respect, and frankly, setting the record straight. Because last night's public revelation at Rachel's wedding had been only the beginning. Rachel and Jake, navigating the aftermath of the wedding, were beginning to adjust. Jake in particular had started seeking my guidance in ways that were almost comical. He would call or text me late at night, Eleanor, quick question on the Patel merger. Do you think we should adjust the capital allocation? Initially, I found it amusing. Jake, who had once dismissed my hobby business as quaint, was now tapping into the very expertise he had once mocked. I could almost hear his internal dialogue. She drives an old Honda. She lives in a small apartment. How can this woman possibly understand complex acquisitions? But the truth, as Jake was slowly learning, was undeniable. Experience and intellect were not constrained by age, modesty, or outward appearances. Rachel, however, struggled more. She adored her mother, but guilt had created a chasm between admiration and fear. Every time we met socially, I could sense the hesitation, the worry about saying the wrong thing, the fear of inadvertently disrespecting me. One afternoon, she approached me in my office, holding a folder of client proposals. "Mom, I thought I understood what you do," she said, her voice low. "But after the wedding, and after seeing how people react to you, I realize I had no idea. I want to help. I really do. I don't know where to start." I studied her for a long moment. "Rachel, helping isn't just about tasks or paperwork. It's about respect and understanding. You have to see people as capable and strong before you can truly support them. That's the hardest part, especially when they've always been underestimated." Her eyes widened. "So, I need to change how I see you first." I nodded. "Exactly. Then you can take the next step, genuinely supporting someone without condescension or embarrassment." She took a deep breath. "I think I can do that. I really do." And for the first time since the wedding, I saw a glimmer of hope. A way to rebuild the bond strained by humiliation and misjudgment. Business, however, waited for no one. The companies in my portfolio were thriving, but they required constant attention. Every acquisition meant new challenges, from employee morale to operational efficiency. Some companies resisted change. Some executives doubted my decisions. But by now, I had learned how to wield subtle influence. Quietly, strategically, and decisively. One afternoon, I attended a board meeting for Sterling Technologies, the company Rachel's husband worked for. I could feel the tension in the room as I entered. Many of the executives still carried echoes of last night's embarrassment in their expressions. Some whispered among themselves, unsure how to address the woman who had acquired their company without overtly flaunting her authority. I smiled politely and began the meeting. "Let's discuss the upcoming Q3 strategy. I want to focus on growth projections, potential acquisitions, and operational efficiency improvements." As the discussion unfolded, I noticed subtle shifts. Executives who had once interrupted or dismissed me now leaned in, listening intently. Their body language changed. The room's energy shifted from casual skepticism to cautious respect. It was vindication, but quiet, understated, and immensely satisfying. Back at home, Rachel and Jake were adjusting as well. Dinner conversations became more business-focused than gossip-focused. Jake often asked my opinion before making decisions at work. Rachel, too, began to ask thoughtful questions about my strategies, showing genuine curiosity rather than judgment. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Rachel sat beside me on the balcony, a glass of wine in hand. "Mom," she said softly, "I keep thinking about last night, and about everything since. I feel like I've been living in this narrow box of assumptions about you. I never stopped to consider that you could be this." She gestured vaguely toward the skyline, toward the empire I had quietly built. "You don't have to apologize for not seeing it earlier," I said, smiling. "The important thing is that you do see it now, and that you respect it." She nodded slowly. "I do. And I want to. I feel guilty for underestimating you for so long." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "Guilt isn't productive. Learning is. Respect and understanding are what matter." Meanwhile, the ripple effects extended beyond family. Clients began approaching me, inspired by the story of my public revelation. Some were executives who had attended the wedding. Others were entrepreneurs who had heard the tale through industry gossip. Every new conversation carried the subtext: this woman has accomplished what few dare to attempt, and she's unafraid to be herself. Even Mr. Anderson became an indispensable ally. Together, we identified opportunities to integrate my companies, streamline operations, and strengthen influence in the tech sector. I could feel the subtle power shift occurring, not through arrogance or intimidation, but through competence, experience, and undeniable results. Rachel, in particular, began to grasp the lessons of humility, respect, and recognition. One evening, she confessed, "Mom, I've been reflecting on how I treated you, how I judged your ambitions, and laughed at what I thought were delusions. I see now. That was cruel, and I want to do better." I smiled warmly. "And you will. That's the essence of growth. Not just business growth, but personal growth. You've learned an important lesson. Underestimate someone, and you risk underestimating life itself." She nodded, a small but sincere smile spreading across her face. "I understand now, and I'm proud of you." I felt a quiet satisfaction settle over me. Pride, not from wealth or recognition, but from finally witnessing the transformation. In my family, in my business, and in the way the world now saw me. The days after the wedding revelation were like a whirlwind caught in slow motion. My life had always been busy, but now it carried a new layer of intensity. One born not just of my own ambitions, but of the way the world had to adjust to them. Everything had changed, from family dynamics to business strategy, and I could feel the tension crackling beneath the surface, like static electricity. I started the week with a series of high-stakes calls. My acquisitions were demanding attention, operational restructuring for data flow systems, integrating a tech platform at Sterling Technologies, and strategic planning for a newly acquired marketing firm. Each call, each decision carried weight, not just financial weight, but human weight. The careers, livelihoods, and futures of hundreds of people now rested, in part, on choices I made. And this was exhilarating. Rachel, meanwhile, was navigating the aftermath of her wedding with a mix of guilt and newfound respect. Our first conversation after the wedding had been tense, but honest, and it set the tone for what would become a challenging but ultimately transformative period in our relationship. "Mom," she said cautiously one evening, as we sat across from each other at my kitchen table, "I've been thinking about last night, about everything that happened. I want to help, but I feel like I'm constantly walking on eggshells. How do I know I'm doing the right thing?" I leaned back in my chair, a faint smile playing on my lips. "Rachel, you'll never get it perfect. Supporting someone in business, or in life, isn't about perfection. It's about recognition, humility, and honesty. If you approach me with those, you'll get it right." She nodded slowly. "Recognition, humility, honesty. I can try that. You can try, or you can choose to. It makes all the difference." Business as usual moved forward with relentless momentum. That week, I made a bold decision to expand DT Enterprises into international markets. The opportunity had presented itself quietly. A tech firm in Europe was struggling under mismanagement, and their assets aligned perfectly with our portfolio. I convened a video call with my executives, carefully orchestrating the discussion. "Team," I began, "we have an opportunity to acquire a strategic company in Europe. This move isn't just about revenue. It's about influence, market positioning, and long-term growth. I want a full operational and financial review by Friday. If this aligns with our goals, we move forward immediately." There was a pause, then questions, then strategy. And as the discussion unfolded, I realized something significant. People were now listening, not just politely, but with genuine attentiveness. The respect that had been absent at the wedding, the dismissive attitudes, the condescending smiles, was gone. In its place was focus, anticipation, and subtle deference. Even Jake was beginning to understand. He would now run proposals past me, seeking guidance rather than judgment. One afternoon, as we reviewed a market analysis together, he paused mid-sentence. "Mom," he said slowly, "I underestimated your reach and your understanding. I didn't realize the scope of what you've built." I nodded, letting the silence speak as much as my words could. "It's okay, Jake. Many people underestimate what they don't see, and what they assume is beyond their comprehension. The lesson isn't about punishment, it's about awareness." Rachel's journey was more nuanced. She oscillated between admiration and lingering embarrassment. She struggled to reconcile the public humiliation she had orchestrated with the realization that her mother had quietly built a business empire in the background. One evening, she approached me in my office with a folder of strategic plans for one of my smaller companies. "Mom," she said softly, "I've been reviewing the reports. I want to help, but I'm still learning. I don't want to make mistakes or undermine your work." I studied her carefully, noting the sincerity in her eyes. "Rachel, learning is part of the process. You're not here to replicate what I do. You're here to understand and support. That's how influence is multiplied. By teaching, by listening, and by acting with integrity." Her shoulders relaxed slightly. "Okay, I can do that." I smiled. "Good. Because respect without action is just words. And we're past words now." At home, the subtle tension began to ease. Rachel and Jake, once tentative around me, were slowly finding their rhythm. Jake stopped making patronizing remarks about my work. Rachel began asking intelligent questions about my companies, demonstrating a genuine curiosity that hadn't existed before. Even family dinners became discussions about strategy, industry, news, and future opportunities. A stark contrast to the passive-aggressive commentary that had dominated the table for decades. Yet, the most fascinating changes were happening externally. Word had begun to spread quietly about my wedding revelation, and the scope of DT Enterprises. Clients and industry contacts approached me, sometimes cautiously, sometimes with excitement. One afternoon, a potential client, a CEO who had attended the wedding, called personally. "Ms. Hayes," he said, voice laced with respect, "I need to discuss a possible acquisition, and I'd like your guidance." In person, I chuckled softly. "Of course, let's schedule a meeting." It was remarkable how quickly perception changed. A woman once underestimated, dismissed, and patronized was now a figure of authority, expertise, and influence. And yet I remained grounded. Public recognition was gratifying, but it wasn't the goal. The goal had always been to build, to grow, and to command respect through results. The family dynamics had shifted further. Rachel, once mortified, now approached me with genuine interest and humility. Jake, who had mocked my business initially, sought guidance with respect. Even Claire, my sister, had begun to ask questions, cautiously testing the waters of reconciliation and acknowledgement. I realized that true influence was multidimensional. It wasn't just about money, power, or visibility. It was about commanding respect, asserting boundaries, and allowing others to recognize your achievements on their own terms. Even if that recognition came slowly, painfully, and in the wake of embarrassment. And so, as the week drew to a close, I stood at my office balcony, looking over the city skyline. The sunset painted the glass buildings in fiery shades of orange and gold. A reminder that even in the face of past doubt, Progress was unstoppable. Rachel approached quietly, standing beside me. "Mom, thank you," she said simply. "I don't think I could have learned this lesson any other way." I smiled, the wind catching my hair. Life has a way of teaching the lessons we most need, sometimes in the most unexpected ways. And now, we move forward, stronger, smarter, and unapologetically ambitious. She nodded, a quiet smile spreading across her face. For the first time in a long time, I felt the balance begin to shift. Not just in business, but in my family, in my life, and in the way the world would see me from this moment forward. The weeks following Rachel's wedding were a strange mix of exhilaration and tension. The public revelation of my achievements had shifted the dynamics in my favor. But with new power came new responsibilities. And of course, new challenges. The city skyline from my office window no longer represented just my empire. It reminded me daily that success demanded constant vigilance. I had started to notice subtle changes in behavior among my staff, my family, and even Rachel and Jake. Where once there had been disbelief or patronizing remarks, there was now a cautious curiosity. Every conversation carried the silent acknowledgement. Eleanor Hayes was no longer a late-life hobbyist, but a serious force in business. And some people still didn't know whether to respect that force or fear it. The first major challenge arrived in the form of the European acquisition. The tech firm in Berlin was struggling with management inefficiencies, declining revenue, and a fractured workforce. The CEO had reached out directly after hearing about DT Enterprises' rapid expansion, requesting guidance. Though he had no idea that the small business consultant he'd been introduced to months ago was, in fact, the same Eleanor Hayes, who now commanded a $50 million portfolio. The acquisition process was intense. Due diligence reports revealed hidden liabilities, employee dissatisfaction, and even signs of financial misreporting. But I thrived in the chaos. My years of experience in operations, finance, and strategics growth gave me the clarity to navigate the complexities with confidence. I led my team in evaluating risk, calculating potential returns, and negotiating terms that were favorable yet fair. By the time I was in the boardroom in Berlin, it was clear that this deal was more than just a financial move. It was a statement. DT Enterprises was no longer a local powerhouse. We were an international player, capable of influencing markets across continents. While I managed global acquisitions, Rachel was adjusting to her new understanding of me. Gone were the days of dismissive remarks or embarrassed laughter. Now she approached me with thoughtful questions, a clear desire to understand my strategies, and a surprising amount of initiative. One evening, she entered my home office with a proposal. "Mom, I've been thinking about your company's marketing strategies. I've identified a potential partnership that could expand our consumer base and increase revenue. I'd like to present it to you." I studied her presentation carefully, impressed by the clarity and research she had invested. "Rachel, this is solid work. You've thought about the numbers, the impact, and the long-term benefits." "I'm impressed," she smiled, a mixture of pride and relief on her face. "You really think it's worth pursuing?" "Absolutely. And more importantly," I said, leaning back in my chair, "you're beginning to understand what it means to contribute meaningfully, rather than just observing from the sidelines. That's a skill you'll carry for life." Jake's transformation was equally fascinating. The man who had once dismissed me as naive and incapable now sought guidance at nearly every turn. He asked detailed questions about operations, financial structuring, and negotiation strategies. One evening, as we reviewed a merger proposal for Sterling Technologies, He paused mid-sentence. "Mom, I don't know how I could have been so blind," he admitted. "I thought I knew business, but I underestimated you. Completely." I smiled politely. "Jake, it's not about underestimating. It's about recognizing where expertise comes from and understanding that appearances can be deceiving. You've learned the hard way, but that awareness will serve you far better than arrogance ever could." He nodded, silently acknowledging that the lessons of humility and respect often came at the most unexpected times, like during his wife's wedding reception. Of course, not everyone welcomed my rise with open arms. Some executives and former colleagues still carried doubts, jealousies, and insecurities. A few attempted subtle resistance, questioning decisions or delaying approvals. But I had learned over the years that power wasn't about confrontation. It was about strategy, patience, and timing. I addressed these challenges methodically. A delayed approval. I followed up with data and projections. An executive questioning my authority. I quietly demonstrated competence and results. Over time, even the skeptics had no choice but to acknowledge the force they were dealing with. A woman who had transformed what others perceived as limitations into undeniable strength. The wedding revelation had inadvertently become excellent marketing. Word of my success spread across the city and industry circles. New clients reached out, investors expressed interest, and even former doubters began to approach me with cautious admiration. One particularly memorable moment occurred during a networking event. A prominent industry journalist approached me with a notebook in hand. "Ms. Hayes," she said, "your story at your daughter's wedding has gone viral in business circles. Could I interview you for an article about late-life entrepreneurship and overcoming family skepticism?" I laughed softly. "Absolutely. Let's set a time." The article, when it published, was met with enthusiasm. It highlighted my strategic acquisitions, operational expertise, and resilience, and subtly referenced the infamous wedding moment that had put everyone on notice. The story positioned me not just as a successful entrepreneur, but as an inspiration for those who believed they were too old to redefine their lives. Amid all the business dealings, family dynamics continued to evolve. Rachel was no longer hesitant or embarrassed. She began to genuinely admire my accomplishments while learning to respect boundaries. Jake, too, had adopted a more collaborative approach, seeking guidance rather than offering unsolicited advice. Even my sister, Claire, began to shift. While she had been vocal about my unrealistic ambitions in the past, she now brought friends and colleagues to meet me, subtly bragging about her sister's achievements. While it was a small victory, it was a sign that perceptions were changing, slowly but surely. My life had entered a new era. Eleanor Hayes was no longer simply a woman overcoming age-related stereotypes or family skepticism. I was a strategist, an entrepreneur, a leader. My accomplishments were no longer invisible. My family, colleagues, and the industry were beginning to see me as I truly was, competent, determined, and unapologetically ambitious. And yet, I knew the journey was far from over. With international expansion, new partnerships, and emerging business challenges, there were still obstacles to navigate, people to influence, and lessons to reinforce. The city skyline from my office remained a daily reminder that with vision, strategy, and perseverance, no challenge was insurmountable. Rachel, Jake, and even my sister would have to adjust to this new reality. And that was okay, because I had finally learned what it meant to command respect. Not by demanding it, but by demonstrating it through action, intelligence, and unwavering confidence. Life has a way of reminding you that success is rarely linear. Just when I felt the balance between family, business, and personal satisfaction was finally aligning, a new challenge arrived, and it arrived like a storm. It began on a Monday morning. I was reviewing quarterly reports for Sterling Technologies when my phone buzzed incessantly. Calls from legal advisors, urgent emails from executives, and a slew of notifications from our European acquisition team flooded my inbox. Something wasn't right. The issue was clear within minutes. One of the companies we had recently acquired in Berlin had financial discrepancies far more severe than anticipated. Key executives had misreported profits, and internal audits revealed potential liabilities that could cost us millions if not addressed immediately. I took a deep breath. Crises were part of business, yes, but this one demanded precision, strategy, and a level of control that tested my patience. My team looked to me for direction, and I knew hesitation could cost us everything. Gather the leadership team in the conference room, I instructed. My voice was calm, measured, but carried the authority of someone who had weathered far worse storms than this. We're going to address this head on. No excuses, no assumptions, just facts and action plans. Within an hour, my executive team assembled. Charts, spreadsheets, and reports covered every surface of the room. The gravity of the situation was palpable, but so was the energy. This was a battlefield, and I intended to lead from the front. Here's the situation, I began, pointing to the discrepancies. We've identified misreporting and potential legal exposure. Our first priority is stabilization, securing assets, reviewing contracts, and addressing the workforce issues. I want every department lead to provide a mitigation plan within 48 hours. I will personally review and approve all communications before anything is released externally. Questions followed, concerns were raised, but I remained composed. My experience had taught me that in crises, emotion is the enemy, strategy is the weapon, and over the next several hours, I orchestrated a series of meetings, delegations, and action plans that reassured my team and mitigated immediate risks. By evening, a plan was in motion. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but resolute. This was the part of being a CEO that no one had warned me about. The sleepless nights, the relentless decisions, the responsibility for hundreds of people whose livelihoods depended on your competence. Yet, I thrived under pressure. Just as the crisis was stabilizing, a more personal challenge arose. Rachel. She had been observing the process closely. Her curiosity piqued, but also tinged with anxiety. "Mom," she said hesitantly, standing at the doorway of my office. I want to help, but I don't know how. I feel like everything you're doing is so far beyond what I understand." I gestured for her to sit. "Rachel, this isn't about understanding every detail. It's about seeing the process, learning how to approach problems strategically, and knowing when to ask questions. Watch, listen, and think critically. That's how you grow." She nodded, though the tension in her shoulders suggested skepticism. Jake had come in as well, visibly uneasy. He was learning that his mother-in-law wasn't just a formidable presence. In the room, she was the authority, and his prior assumptions about her had been laughably wrong. The next week brought another challenge: media exposure. A tech blog picked up a story about DT Enterprises' Berlin acquisition, highlighting the crisis. Though factual, the tone implied mismanagement and questioned my leadership. For a moment, I felt the familiar sting of public perception. The same feeling I had endured at Rachel's wedding. But I didn't panic. Instead, I crafted a response. Carefully worded press releases, strategic interviews, and behind-the-scenes clarifications ensured that the narrative shifted. I wasn't just defending my reputation. I was controlling the narrative. By the end of the week, the article had been reframed, focusing on my decisive action, swift crisis management, and innovative solutions. Throughout this period, Rachel and Jake observed quietly. Rachel's admiration was growing, tempered by a newfound respect for boundaries. She realized that leadership wasn't just about vision or wealth. It was about poise, decisiveness, and courage under pressure. One evening, as I reviewed financial reports late into the night, Rachel approached me with a notebook in hand. "Mom, I've been thinking about how you handled this entire situation. Can I take on a small project within DT Enterprises? Just something to learn the ropes without interfering." I looked at her, measuring her sincerity. "All right," I said slowly. "But one condition. You will report directly to me, and you will follow my instructions exactly. No shortcuts, no assumptions. If you can handle this, you'll earn my trust in business." She nodded eagerly. "I understand." Word of my crisis management soon reached other companies in our network, investors, competitors, and even previous skeptics began reaching out, seeking advice, partnership, or insight. I had quietly transformed from a late-life entrepreneur to a figure whose opinion and strategy carried weight across industries. It was fascinating to watch. People who had laughed at me, dismissed me, or patronized me were now recalibrating their perception. Respect was no longer optional. It was unavoidable. And yet, I remained grounded. Power without purpose was meaningless. My goal wasn't to humiliate anyone or to show off. It was to build, to influence, and to create something enduring. I realized a fundamental truth. Leadership isn't about being liked. It isn't about avoiding conflict or maintaining comfort. Leadership is about action, decisiveness, and the ability to navigate uncertainty with calm and clarity. Rachel and Jake were witnessing this transformation firsthand. Their perception of me had shifted completely. From a figure of mild ridicule to a woman commanding respect in every interaction. And while some family members were still adjusting, the foundation of acknowledgement and admiration had been laid. I leaned back in my chair that night, overlooking the city skyline once again. The lights twinkled like 1,000 possibilities, reminding me that with every challenge, I was becoming stronger, smarter, and more unstoppable. The crises weren't over, far from it, but I knew that with strategy, focus, and unwavering confidence, I could navigate anything, whether in business, family, or life itself. And for the first time in decades, I felt truly in control. The months following the Berlin acquisition and the public wedding revelation had transformed more than just my business empire. They had transformed my family. The tension that once defined our interactions had been replaced, cautiously at first, by respect, admiration, and a new understanding of boundaries. But as I sat in my office one crisp morning, overlooking the city skyline, I knew that true reconciliation required more than acknowledgement. It required intentional action. Rachel was the first to truly approach me, her demeanor more humble, her questions more thoughtful. She wanted to understand not only the businesses I managed, but the philosophy behind them. "Mom," she said one evening, holding a notebook filled with ideas and questions. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened at the wedding. I want to do better. I don't want to just admire you from the sidelines anymore. I want to contribute, if you'll let me." I smiled, feeling both pride and relief. "Rachel, I'm proud of you for wanting to learn. Not because it flatters me, but because it shows growth. That's what life's about. Learning, adapting, and seizing opportunity. Over time, she began working on small projects, gaining confidence, and understanding the intricacies of strategic decision-making. The same daughter who had once mocked my ambitions now sat beside me in boardrooms, offering insight, asking questions, and slowly earning my respect as a thoughtful business partner. Jake's transformation was equally remarkable. Where he had once offered unsolicited, condescending advice, he now sought mentorship, asking intelligent questions and deferring to my judgment. The same man who had dismissed my achievements now recognized the breadth of my influence and skill, and he wasn't afraid to show it. Even my sister Claire had begun to adjust her perspective. Initially skeptical and judgmental, she started bringing friends and colleagues to meet me, subtly boasting about her sister's accomplishments. One afternoon, she appeared in my office with a hesitant smile. "Eleanor, I just wanted to say, you've truly done something remarkable. I judged you too quickly, and I'm sorry." I nodded, appreciating the acknowledgement, but keeping my focus on the bigger picture. "Thank you, Claire. Recognition matters less than action. Let's move forward, not dwell on the past." The tension that had once defined our sibling relationship slowly dissolved, replaced with cautious respect and a shared recognition of what it meant to achieve success despite adversity. DT Enterprises had now grown beyond my initial vision. The Berlin acquisition had set a precedent, positioning us as an international player in tech and operational consulting. Investors, media outlets, and industry peers began reaching out, eager to learn from my methods and explore potential collaborations. At a conference in New York, I was invited to speak on a panel of industry leaders. Standing at the podium, looking out at hundreds of professionals, I realized just how far I had come. The woman who had once been dismissed as a late-life hobbyist was now a recognized authority. Her experience and insights sought after across continents. I often reflected on Rachel's wedding and the dramatic revelation of my accomplishments. Initially, it had been a source of humiliation and heartbreak, but in retrospect, it had served as a catalyst for transformation, not just in my family, but in my career. The public acknowledgement of my success had forced my family to reevaluate their assumptions, and in doing so, it had shifted the power dynamics. Respect, once reluctantly given, was now freely offered, not out of fear, but because my achievements were undeniable. Rachel, in particular, had grown immensely. She learned to admire strength and intelligence, rather than judge based on age or appearance. And in her growth, I saw the potential for a stronger, healthier relationship than we had ever had before. As my business empire expanded, I began thinking about legacy. What would DT Enterprises represent beyond profits and acquisitions? I realized that my true legacy would be influence. The ability to show that reinvention, determination, and resilience were not bound by age. I started mentoring younger entrepreneurs, particularly women over 40 who had been told their time had passed. I shared my story, my methods, and my philosophy, that ambition and skill were timeless, and that confidence paired with strategy could overcome nearly any obstacle. Rachel became my protege, in a sense, learning the nuances of negotiations, acquisitions, and operational strategy. Our bond strengthened not through shared leisure, but through shared purpose, understanding, and mutual respect. One afternoon, I stood in my office, reflecting on the past 2 years. From the initial layoff, to the wedding revelation, to global expansion, I realized that my most significant achievements weren't just the acquisitions, the revenue, or the $50 million portfolio. They were the personal victories. Regaining self-respect, earning the acknowledgement of my family, and building a legacy that transcended wealth. Even small moments now carried weight. Rachel calling me for advice, Jake deferring to my judgment, Claire introducing me proudly to her friends. These were the indicators of true success. The pinnacle of this journey came unexpectedly. A major tech investor approached me with an acquisition proposal worth several times my existing portfolio. The negotiations were complex, high stakes, and public. But unlike previous challenges, I was fully prepared. Every decision, every move, every communication was deliberate. At the final meeting, the investor leaned back and said, "Ms. Hayes, I have to be honest. I wasn't sure what to expect when I first heard about DT Enterprises, but you've exceeded every expectation. Your vision, strategy, and execution are unmatched. It's rare to see someone of any age with your acumen." I smiled calmly. "Thank you. It's not about age. It's about commitment, focus, and resilience. Those who refuse to be underestimated often achieve the most." The deal closed successfully, further solidifying my position as a powerhouse in the industry. The same city that once laughed at the late-life entrepreneur now recognized her as a force to be reckoned with. By the time Rachel's first anniversary arrived, our family dynamics had shifted entirely. Respect had replaced ridicule, admiration replaced skepticism, and boundaries had been set firmly and respected. Rachel, Jake, and even Claire had learned the hard lesson. Eleanor Hayes, formerly underestimated, often dismissed, was a woman whose ambition, intelligence, and resilience demanded acknowledgement. Now, at 63, I often reflect on those pivotal moments: the layoff, the wedding, the acquisitions, the crises. Each had tested me, each had shaped me, and each had contributed to the person I had become. Eleanor Hayes was no longer defined by age, opinion, or past setbacks. She was defined by action, intelligence, and unwavering self-belief. And perhaps the most satisfying part of all, I had finally stopped letting others determine my worth. I had proven that resilience, strategy, and determination were timeless. My family, my employees, and the world had learned the same lesson. Never underestimate a woman who has decided she is done being underestimated. I leaned back in my chair, sipping a cup of coffee as the morning sun painted the skyline gold. The empire I had built was secure. My family was learning to respect and love me fully, and the next chapter of my life awaited, filled with challenges, opportunities, and triumphs yet unseen. And this time, I was ready for all of it. If Eleanor's journey taught you anything, it's that it's never too late to rewrite your story. Don't let anyone underestimate your dreams. Your best chapters are still ahead. Comment below. Have you ever faced doubt from family or peers when chasing a goal? How did you prove them wrong? Share your story. We want to celebrate your wins too. Like this video if Eleanor's story inspired you to take bold action, no matter your age. Subscribe to your channel name and hit the notification bell so you never miss stories of resilience, reinvention, and unstoppable women rewriting their lives. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that it's never too late to succeed.